Morning, Rick. You good?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for agreeing to come on. So, what's your reading of the data at the moment? How dangerous a time is it in the fight against COVID, or should we be being a bit more optimistic?
Well, I think the case numbers, if we start looking at those, Rick, first, they're at record levels. We've got significant infections in the community.
Hmm.
If you look across the last week, we've seen a 38% rise in the percentage of positive cases reported. It's actually up 31% in England, 91% in Northern Ireland, 66% in Scotland, and 78% in Wales. And England actually has the lowest case rate per 100,000, even though it's got the least restrictions. But that, in part, is mainly down, I think, to do with the fact that Omicron hit London first.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the optimistic signs within London is we saw a rapid rise in cases in London. And if you look at the growth rate in London, Rick, now it's actually come down in the last 3 or 4 days. So it could be that other parts of the UK are just a little bit behind London. And if we look at South Africa as well, we saw a massive rise in Omicron in South Africa.
Hmm.
And we've seen a massive decline in Omicron in South Africa as well. I think the optimism is that if you look at the hospital figures themselves, and obviously it's putting a lot of strain on the NHS, we're starting to see more patients going into hospital with Omicron, but not being treated for it.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an important thing, because you see the news reports that people, more and more admissions. Remember, not everybody's going in needing treatment for the virus, but it still puts pressure on the system because
Yeah, because
obviously
they have to be. You have to put in extra infection control measures, even if someone isn't being treated for COVID if they have it, right?
yeah, you have to do that. And obviously, as well, there's a risk of them passing it on, because we know that some people actually catch the virus in hospital. Over 1 in 5 of the admissions that are added to the figures each day are catching the virus in hospital. And obviously, they're more vulnerable. But the optimism, I suppose, is that we're not seeing the same rise in the intensive care side of the hospital. So critical care beds and ventilated beds, there's been no rise at all very much in across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which supports the scientific evidence that's coming out that Omicron's kind of less deadly. And deaths themselves, Rick, they're 83% lower than this time last year. And remember now, the vast majority of the most vulnerable have had a booster vaccine as well, which is going to help in that fight to kind of keep deaths quite low. I think the main call out, Rick, is going to be, with so many people having COVID, and the official government figures every day are the number of deaths with a positive COVID test. You might see deaths go up because people are dying. They may have died anyway, but they've got a positive test. So I think the main call out for the listeners is to think about, we need to look at the ONS figures that come out each week on the total number of deaths, because that will give us an indication as to, is Omicron and this wave causing more deaths than what we would expect.
Do you think that there are deaths in the post, so to speak, though?
Oh, of course, there's definitely going to be a rise in deaths, I think, coming in the next couple of weeks, because you get that 14-day lag of the rising cases. And it was about 14, 15 days ago that we saw the massive rise in Omicron across the country. On my Twitter feed, I kind of track the two, and you look at the time lag between we're hitting that point now where the cases have shot up. The death figures, inevitably in the next few weeks, on your show, you're going to be reporting probably that more deaths are being reported. But remember, some of those sad deaths may have happened because people have just had Omicron and, they've got kind of poor health and they've just gone into hospital with this. So, people need to keep thinking, keep safe. We've got these different restrictions across the different parts of the 4 countries. Some common sense, keep yourself safe and things. We've got a huge booster rollout that's affected kind of the older age groups that are normally the ones that get admitted. And the pressure on the NHS is not specifically just down to COVID. We've got less patients in hospital with COVID than this time last year, even though they're going up. But there's far
staff
more
shortages.
Yeah, there's staff shortages, and there's far more people in for other things because of the catch-up. And on the staff shortages, Rick, just the final figures on those, where the latest figures up to Boxing Day published last week. We'll get new figures today. It's a similar amount of people who are off sick than this time last year, so it's no worse, but I think the last 7 days it probably has got a lot worse than what this time last year, if you're looking at the anecdotal evidence from what the NHS trusts are telling us.
Yeah, a lot of trusts declaring critical incidents. What do the statistics show us at the moment about the importance of being vaccinated in terms of avoiding hospitalisation, avoiding being admitted to intensive care?
Yeah, so it's quite clear that the vaccination rollout itself has been a game changer, and if it does vary, Rick, between if you're far older, you're going to have a much greater effect than if you're much younger. Up until November, about 48% of the admissions to intensive care were people who were unvaccinated. That in the December figures, now that's crept up to 61%, and overall, you've kind of got more people who are vaccinated in hospital than unvaccinated. But that's not surprising because the vast majority of people in the population are vaccinated. If you look at the relative risk, though, if you compare, say, two individuals who've got similar characteristics, somebody who is unvaccinated is more likely to end up in hospital than somebody who is vaccinated. So there is that benefit to doing it, but it does vary significantly depending on your kind of age. And another thing that's not very normally talked about is actually there's a significant risk for people who are in the obesity category as well. They're overrepresented in intensive care with COVID. So I think obviously new year, let's get our public health message out there, look after your health and then let us fight the COVID battle ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. That was spoken about a lot more, I feel like, at the start of the pandemic, wasn't it? That was a thing that people spoke about.
Yeah, and if we come to that point now where we've got clear evidence on all of this, the average age of patients in hospital is still quite elderly. It's very rare for younger people to go in specifically for COVID. They may be in hospital with COVID. And I just think, we've got to tackle this pandemic as not just with vaccines. The vaccines are really helping, look after people's health and just some common sense, in terms of if you're going to visit vulnerable people, do your lateral flow tests, make sure you're being careful and things. And then I think if you're looking at the data, Rick, we're probably by February, we should be over the worst of all of this. And then we can start looking at tackling that backlog in the NHS.
Hopefully we'll talk to you again in February and we can celebrate you being right about that, Jamie.
Hopefully, Rick.